You'd think after a lifetime of living on the water, some people would realize you can't fight the current with a clipboard. But no, not Meredith Thorne. She was the kind of woman who believed a pair of expensive sunglasses and a tightly wound blazer gave her jurisdiction over Mother Nature itself. That Saturday morning, the air smelled like pine and peace, until the screech of tires announced her arrival. She marched down my 50-foot dock, the same one my granddaddy built 60 years ago, like she was leading an invasion. Her new Lexus SUV idling right next to the hand-painted sign that clearly reads, "Private property. Keep it clean." Meredith stood there, arms crossed, staring at my beloved Catalina 30 sailboat. The old man's promise, a vessel she had decided, arbitrarily, was visually offensive and exceeded the community's nautical aesthetic guidelines. "Mr. Davis," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I gave you 72 hours. This vessel is an obstruction, a fire hazard, and frankly, it looks like something a pirate would live on. Remove it, or we will remove it for you." I was on my porch, sipping coffee from a mug chipped in 3 places, watching the whole performance unfold like a poorly directed play. The tow truck driver, a good old boy named Randy who looked deeply uncomfortable, fiddled with his chains. "Meredith," I replied, keeping my voice low, letting the wind carry the words. "That's a 30-foot vessel. Registered with the Coast Guard. Docked at a private pier. It's been here since before your McMansion was poured. You touch it, and you buy it, along with every ounce of trouble I can send your way." Her perfect, Botox smooth face tightened. "This is the Heron's Crest Estates. Mr. Davis, we have standards. Our bylaws grant the Architectural and Water Safety Committee, which I chair, the authority to maintain the visual harmony of our shared shoreline." She took a breath, puffing out her chest like a robin. "Consider this your final official citation." She slapped a neon green sticker onto the hull, a sticker that immediately began to curl under the morning dew, slipping down the fiberglass and clinging pathetically to the toe of her designer loafer. I couldn't help it, I chuckled. Just then, a familiar roar rolled down the gravel road. It was my brother, Deputy Sheriff Ben, pulling up in his cruiser. He stepped out, slow and deliberate, hat tilted back, hands resting easy on his belt. "Meredith," Ben drawled, "got a warrant for that seizure?" She spun around, startled. "Sheriff, this is a community code enforcement matter. State law has no jurisdiction here." "Ma'am, last I checked, property lines are state law, and trespassing is a crime," Ben said, pointing with his thumb toward my dock. "Now, do you have a court order proving the Heron's Crest Wall owns the water this boat is floating on?" Meredith stammered. She didn't, and in that moment, as Randy the tow truck driver shrugged and started reeling in his cables, I knew this wasn't just about a sailboat. This was about power, control, and a fundamental misunderstanding of history, a history that Meredith Thorne was about to learn the hard way. See, to understand why her sticker ended up on her shoe, you had to understand this lake. Cedar Creek. Most folks just see water. But I see a covenant. My granddaddy, Silas Davis, was one of the original homesteaders back in the 30s. He didn't just build a cabin, he owned the land beneath the lake and the riparian rights along the creek that fed it. When the developers came in 50 years later and built their fancy subdivision, Heron's Crest, they needed access to the lake. Granddaddy, being the decent, community-minded man he was, cut a deal. He'd grant an easement for fishing and non-motorized boating access to the community dock, as long as the entire perimeter remained his property for stewardship, taxation, and protection. He put the sealed documents, the original deed, the survey maps, the whole kit and caboodle, in a safety deposit box and told my father, "Son, some folks will confuse paperwork with power. They'll try to redraw the shoreline with a pen. Don't fight them with noise, fight them with paper." For decades, that paper stayed in the box, and the lake was open. Kids learned to swim here. Couples fished off my dock, and I just kept the peace, fixed a stray outboard, and hauled away the garbage. It was a good life. Until Meredith Thorne arrived. She moved in 3 years ago and immediately weaponized the HOA's bylaws. Mailbox paint, landscaping height, the color of your porch swing, it was all subject to a fine. People paid up just to make the phone calls stop. Her smile never reached her eyes, and it certainly never reached the waterline. Her first letter to me was titled, "Dear Occupant." I laughed and burned it in the stove. The third one, which mentioned a shared shoreline management plan, that sounded an awful lot like annexation. I didn't burn. I filed it, right next to Granddaddy's old boundary markers. I started keeping a log. Dates, times, names, what she said, who she fined. People think memory is enough. It isn't. When paperwork comes for you, you meet it on paper. The real game changer came in October. A quiet call from Frank at the First Creek Bank. Frank, bless his heart, had a voice like crushed velvet. He asked me, purely theoretically, if I knew any interested parties regarding the note on the Heron's Crest community marina. That marina, a sprawling, ugly structure they used as their clubhouse, sat on a notch of land right where Granddaddy's deed was. And it was secured by a non-performing loan. Frank was just doing his job. But I heard opportunity ringing louder than a church bell. They want to play at authority over a lake they don't own? I thought, I'll meet them at the only table that matters, title, debt, and law. I told Frank to send over the paperwork. Immediately. This wasn't about revenge, though I'd be lying if I said the idea of giving Meredith a financial wedgie didn't appeal to me. This was about restoring the covenant, the promise Granddaddy made to keep the lake accessible, but protected. Meredith's HOA had become a tyranny, measured in petty fines instead of respect. You don't swat a hornet's nest. You suit up and move the hive. I called Grace Chen, my lawyer, a woman who understands that liberty often lives between the commas of a well-written contract. Grace, I said, I think we're about to buy ourselves a loan. She chuckled. About time. Elias, let's make sure we measured twice and cut once. Meanwhile, Meredith kept building her paper tower. Her emails got shriller, citing my dock for impeding communal visibility, and calling my boat incompatible with subdivision values. I replied once, briefly, with a photocopy of the original legal description. My note simply read, "Your jurisdiction ends where my property line begins." I didn't hear back until she arrived with the tow truck for the second time. The following Saturday, Meredith returned, humid and bright, like a bad tropical storm. She brought an entire entourage, her two most spineless board members. A skinny man in a cheap navy suit carrying a briefcase. And, to my absolute delight, Randy, the tow truck driver, who looked like he'd rather be stuck in traffic on the I-95. "Good morning, Mr. Davis," she announced, her voice fake polite. "We are here with legal counsel, Mr. Robert Klein, Esc. to enforce Community Code 5B regarding aesthetic non-compliance and obstruction." I was again on the porch, coffee in hand, a lot of fancy words. "Meredith, just say you're trespassing again." She ignored me. Mr. Klein, sweating profusely in his ill-fitting suit, cleared his throat. Under Article 9 of the Association Charter, the HOA reserves the right to enforce property codes on any area affecting communal aesthetics and access. "Aesthetics?" I asked, putting down my mug and walking toward the dock. "So my boat ruins your view?" "Precisely," Meredith crowed, sensing a win. Its excessive size and reflective hull create a visual obstruction for other residents. Behind her, my neighbor, a grizzled old fisherman named Hank, whispered loudly enough for the mic on the camera crew to pick up, "Yeah. It obstructs my boredom." The small crowd of neighbors gathering on the hillside chuckled. "Tell you what, Meredith," I said, standing toe-to-toe with her. "If you're so sure, say it clearly for the camera. Right here, right now. Say the HOA has legal jurisdiction over this entire lake." She lifted her chin, voice echoing across the water. "Yes, the Heron's Crest HOA has full and complete jurisdiction over all visible properties, including Cedar Creek Lake and all docks attached to it." I smiled, a slow, genuine smile. Perfect, that's all I needed. Before her lawyer could ask what I meant, a low, authoritative sound broke the tension. A white van, bearing the blue stripes of the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary, rolled up. 4 officers stepped out, clipboards in hand. "Morning," the lead officer said, scanning the dock. "We received a report of unauthorized maritime seizure attempt. Everything all right here?" Meredith's face went white. "Who called them?" "I did," I said, raising a hand. "Figured I'd better call the professionals if someone is claiming federal water jurisdiction without knowing what a riparian right is." The officer turned to a now desperate Meredith. "Ma'am, are you attempting to enforce removal on this vessel?" Meredith stammered, flipping frantically through a binder of useless law rules. This isn't about maritime law. It's about community regulation." The officer raised an eyebrow that could freeze lava. "Community regulation doesn't extend to navigable waters or private docks. You have no jurisdiction here." Meredith tried to rally, insisting the lake was within view of our subdivision. "So is the moon, ma'am," the officer replied, stone-faced. "Doesn't mean you can ticket it." The laughter from the neighbors was volcanic. It didn't help when the Coast Guard officer accidentally knocked Meredith's binder, sending a handful of pages fluttering right into the creek. Children started fishing them out with sticks, holding up damp, illegible fragments of her aesthetic guidelines, like evidence of a failed coup. The Coast Guard confirmed my paperwork was in order, tipped their hats, and left. The crowd erupted in cheers. Meredith, grabbing her soaked binder, tried to storm away with what little dignity she had left. But dignity has poor traction when your designer shoes are wet. She slipped halfway up the slope, arms flailing, and though she managed to stay upright, the moment was captured in slow-motion glory by a neighbor's phone camera. It was glorious, but I knew better than to think she was done. Sophie's the kind of woman, my brother Ben later told me, who loses a battle and calls it a warm-up. "You better keep your paperwork close." "I already do," I replied, looking out over the water. This time, I brought a shovel. Over the next few days, the incident went viral. The video, HOA lady tries to evict Coast Guard, gets evicted by gravity instead, hit the local news. The HOA's authority had evaporated in a puff of viral shame. Meredith was furious, silent, and plotting. Late that Tuesday night, I got a text from Frank at the bank. Thorne is trying to renegotiate the Marina loan terms. Big push. I smiled in the dark. Good. She was just signing the rope I'd already handed her. By Thursday, the escrow on the community Marina note closed under my LLC, Blue Cedar Holdings. It was official. I controlled the debt tied to the very heart of her WA operation. Meredith, still acting like Queen of the Lake, was financially indebted to the man she was trying to evict. The best part? She didn't know it yet. I sat with Ben that evening. "You ready for the next round?" he asked, clinking a beer bottle against mine. "You don't stop a show before the finale." "Ben," I said, watching the marina lights flicker in the distance, "you let the actress reach her monologue first." The following Saturday, Meredith did exactly that. She papered the neighborhood with glossy red flyers. Community emergency meeting. Take back Cedar Creek. The meeting was scheduled for noon, right at the marina dock. I counter-programmed with a quiet post on the community board. Lake celebration and barbecue. Saturday at noon, free to all residents. Location: the marina dock. That morning, the marina was chaos. Families arrived with coolers and folding chairs for my party. Kids ran around laughing. A local band set up under a canopy. The air smelled of grilled ribs and freedom. Then, Meredith's convoy arrived. 2 SUVs. A car with a flapping banner that read "Reclaim Our Community Waters," and, predictably, a local news van she had summoned. "Citizens," Meredith shrieked through a megaphone, her pink blazer blinding in the sun. "For too long, our community has suffered under the reckless defiance of one man." The band, right on cue, kicked into a lively country tune. Half the crowd started clapping. "Turn off that music," she screamed. Ben, standing near the grill in his sheriff uniform, waved a rib bone. "Sorry, ma'am, licensed public event. You're welcome to join." Meredith was shaking. She pulled out a printed letter with a fake red seal. "This is an official document from our attorney confirming our jurisdiction over all adjoining shoreline property." I walked over. "Mind if I take a look?" She slapped it into my hand with the pride of a conquering general. I read it, fighting a smile. The seal was crooked, the wording was childish, and the signature looked suspiciously like her own clumsy handwriting. I flipped the paper over and showed the back to the news camera. "You might want to ask your lawyer," I said, "why his letterhead says, template sample." The crowd roared. Meredith's face drained of color. That's not relevant." "Oh, it's relevant," Ben said, stepping forward, "because distributing falsified legal documents is a crime." Just then, a loud clunk echoed. Randy's tow truck had hooked up her Lexus SUV. Randy gave me a wink. "Don't worry, ma'am," Randy called out cheerfully. "Just enforcing the new property owner's request." Meredith spun around, horrified. "What property owner?" "That'd be me," I said, holding up the deed and the mortgage paperwork for the camera to see. "Blue Cedar Holdings. As of last week, the Marina and its facilities, including this dock, are under my control." A collective gasp swept through the crowd, followed by a cheer. "He owns her stage." Meredith's hands shook violently. "You can't do this. That's community property." "Community doesn't pay the bills," I said, my voice low and final. "You defaulted on your loan. I bought the note, legally and cleanly." As the tow truck jerked her SUV forward, the WA banner flapping wildly like a flag of surrender, Meredith's megaphone slipped from her hands and rolled with a splash into the lake. "You came to reclaim the lake, Meredith." I leaned in, just close enough for her to hear over the chant of, "Tow the Queen. Tow the Queen. Looks like the lake reclaimed you." She turned to the news camera. Defeated, voice breaking. "This is a setup. I'm the victim of corruption." But the camera crew had already turned away, focused on the celebration, the grill smoking, the music playing, people dancing. In that moment, the community made its choice. By sundown that day, the HOA's credibility was gone. The local news aired a segment titled "WA President's Protest Turns into Lakefront Disaster." The reporter summarized it perfectly, while residents enjoyed a spontaneous barbecue. The HOA's attempt to enforce non-existent lake regulations ended with their president's car being towed from the very dock she claimed to control. That clip hit 1 million views by Monday morning. Meredith tried to fight back, of course. She sent one last WA email warning residents not to associate with lawbreakers. Nobody opened it. A few replied with photoshopped images of tow trucks. I didn't celebrate. Not outwardly. That wasn't Granddaddy's way. I just sat on the porch that night with Ben, looking out over the still water. "You think she's done?" Ben asked, taking a sip of his beer. I shook my head. "No, she'll find a new way to humiliate herself. Pride always reloads." "You've already written the ending, haven't you?" he grinned. "She just hasn't read it yet," I replied, because the deed was signed. The lake was protected, and the WA, once full of bluster and bureaucracy, was now drowning in its own paperwork. The final act was waiting. A week later, I received a letter, hand-delivered, sealed, and stamped with every ounce of fake authority the remaining board could muster. It read, "Notice of legal action. The Heron's Crest WA hereby files a lawsuit against Mr. Elias Davis for unlawful possession, obstruction of community waters, and harassment." I chuckled, tossing it on the desk. "Harassment?" I'd barely raised my voice. "You've got to admire the imagination," I muttered. "This is the legal equivalent of bringing a spoon to a gunfight." Ben laughed, looking over my shoulder. "Then let's give Meredith the grand stage she's been craving," I said. 2 weeks later, the county courthouse was packed. Families who'd been fined for non-compliant mulch color were there. The retired couple Meredith had cited for excessive wind chime noise was there. Even the local diner owner showed up wearing a shirt that read, "Free the Creek." The place buzzed like a football game before kickoff. At the front of the courtroom sat Meredith, polished to perfection in a charcoal suit, with a stack of papers thick enough to impress someone who'd never read a real legal document. Beside her was a new lawyer, a nervous man with shiny glasses who looked like he'd been hired 20 minutes ago. When the judge entered, my grin widened. It was Judge Theron Wallace, stern, silver-haired, and dignified, a man who'd spent many summers fishing off Cedar Creek with my own granddaddy. I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes when he glanced my way, though his face remained neutral. "Heron's Crest WA versus Elias Davis," Judge Wallace said, striking the gavel. "Let's proceed." Meredith stood with too much confidence. "Your Honor, this man has been a persistent violator of our community's laws, undermining the authority of the WA, and causing public disorder." Her lawyer chimed in, fumbling with his notes. "Yes, Your Honor. The association believes Mr. Davis's private ownership claims are invalid and that his dock encroaches upon common access waters." The judge leaned back. "Counselor, do you have the deeds or legal documents to prove that claim?" The lawyer hesitated. Meredith jumped in. It's common knowledge, Your Honor. Everyone knows the lake has always been shared property. Judge Wallace raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Thorne, common knowledge is not evidence. Please submit your documentation. They shuffled through their folders, pulling out WA newsletters, maps drawn with what looked like a highlighter, and community bylaw excerpts. The judge scanned them, sighed deeply, and looked up. I see no county seal, no registered deed, no title chain, and no surveyed coordinates. Is this all you have? The lawyer's voice cracked. Yes, Your Honor, but it's supported by the collective will of the homeowners. The law doesn't run on collective will. Judge Wallace interrupted calmly. It runs on legal standing. Mr. Davis, the judge said, turning to me, do you have your evidence? I stood and nodded to Grace Chen, my attorney. She wheeled forward a single, heavy box labeled Davis vs. WA, evidence. Inside were neatly bound, certified documents, the original deed, notarized copies, certified surveys, and title history going back nearly a century. Your Honor, Grace said, laying the papers out like a winning hand. This is the property deed for Cedar Creek Lake and all adjoining parcels under the Davis family since 1934. It includes a full riparian rights description. Here are certified plats, tax receipts, and the recently transferred Marina mortgage note, now legally under my client's LLC, Blue Cedar Holdings. The courtroom gasped. The judge flipped through the pages slowly. When he reached the page bearing Granddaddy Silas's signature, he nodded slightly. This document is authentic, he said. I remember Silas Davis. He took me fishing when I was 10. Meredith blurted. Objection. Bias. On what grounds? The judge asked. The lawyer blinked. Bias. The judge's tone dropped an octave. Bias is when I ignore evidence. Counselor, this is called recognition. Laughter rippled through the room. Meredith's face darkened. He forged that deed. The sheriff is his brother. The Coast Guard is his friend. And you? She pointed at the bench. You're biased because you went fishing with his grandfather. The judge's voice turned cold as marble. Watch your tone, Mrs. Thorne, or I'll hold you in contempt. She ignored her lawyer tugging at her sleeve. No, this is tyranny. The judge struck the gavel once. Sharp as thunder. That's enough. The evidence is clear. Cedar Creek Lake is privately owned by Mr. Davis and his predecessors. The WA has overstepped its boundaries and filed a frivolous lawsuit without any legal merit. He paused, letting the silence weigh heavy before continuing. This court hereby dismisses the case with prejudice. Furthermore, the WA is ordered to pay all legal fees and damages related to harassment and property interference. The crowd erupted in applause. The judge looked directly at Meredith. One more thing, Mrs. Thorne. The court recognizes Mr. Davis's right to restrict access to his property, including any WA-affiliated activities. Effective immediately. Any further attempt to assert control over this lake or its facilities will be considered trespassing. The cheers that followed shook the rafters. As I turned to leave, the judge gave me a subtle nod. Your granddaddy would be proud, it said. Meredith was shouting as she was escorted out. You can't silence me. The lake belongs to the people. Outside the courthouse, I was swarmed by neighbors and a reporter. Mr. Davis, what are you going to do now that you've won? I smiled. Simple. I'm going to protect the lake. And maybe throw a really big party. That night, as I sat on my porch, the sound of the gavel played in my mind. Bang! Justice like thunder can clear the air better than any storm. The WA was finished, legally and financially. The next morning, the day of the final eviction, the lake lay glass smooth, the air carrying a hint of dew and cedar. Ben arrived first, 2 deputies with him. The community gathered, everyone wanting to witness what they'd started calling the Great WA Exodus. Ben handed me a clipboard, the official order signed by Judge Wallace. It read, "The Heron's Crest WA is hereby barred from all access, management, or influence over Cedar Creek Lake and its adjoining properties." Looks like we've got ourselves a clean lake again, I said. Cleaner than her reputation. Ben chuckled. Down by the marina, the deputies were stacking the relics of Meredith's rule, laminated rule signs, folders of citations, fake permits, violation stickers, They stacked them neatly on the dock like relics from a dead religion. Then, inevitably, she arrived. "This is an illegal gathering," Meredith shrieked, storming down the path in her signature pink blazer. Ben held up the court order. "Actually, ma'am, it's not. Judge Wallace signed this himself. You have no jurisdiction here. You can't evict an association," she snapped. "Watch me," Ben said. I walked down slowly. "Sophie, you might want to stop shouting. People can hear you over at the diner by now." She turned on me, eyes blazing. "You think you've won because of one crooked judge and a piece of paper?" I held up my coffee cup. "I think I've won because I read the law. You should try it sometime." Ben stepped forward, his tone turning formal. "Mrs. Thorne, by order of the court, you are hereby instructed to vacate the Marina property and cease all HOA activity related to this lake. Failure to comply will result in arrest for trespassing." For a heartbeat, I thought she might charge him. But then she saw the two deputies stepping closer. And the fight drained from her. "This is my lake," she whispered more to herself. "No," I said softly. "It never was. You just rented other people's fear and called it authority." The deputies guided her away. Her voice cracked with shrill protests as she disappeared into the trees, trailed by the last remnants of her court. With Meredith gone, the deputies began the symbolic act. They stacked the confiscated signs on the dock. "Violation. Unauthorized color scheme. HOA property members only." Ben gave a nod, and two men from the Coast Guard Auxiliary stepped forward, carrying pails of lake water. Together, they poured the water over the stack. The ink ran like melted mascara, dissolving the words until they were nothing but black streaks. The crowd erupted into cheers. A little girl started chanting, "Freedom Lake, Freedom Lake." Later that afternoon, a man in a blazer approached me, an investor who had tried to buy the HOA's shared water rights months earlier. "Mr. Davis," he said cautiously, "I had a pending agreement with the HOA to acquire partial control of." I stopped him with a raised hand. "You mean the water rights they never owned? You were about to buy air. And even that air is covered by a right of first refusal in my granddaddy's deed." "I already refused. The deal is dead." He nodded slowly and walked away. That night, the lake was alive again. Strings of lights glowed. Music echoed softly. I looked at Ben. "Guess I learned from the best," I said, glancing at the framed photo of Granddaddy Silas. "You know," Ben said, "the county just called. They want to rename the lake officially. Lake Sanders, on the record this time. Said it's what the people are calling it anyway." I blinked. My grandfather would have been speechless. "Guess you finally finished what he started," Ben whispered. I sat alone on the dock long after the party ended, watching the moonlight shimmer. I had protected the lake. And in doing so, I had freed the people. You know, sometimes the loudest person in the room mistakes noise for power. But true strength is quiet. It's in patience, in persistence, and in the courage to stand your ground with the truth. This story isn't just about an HOA or a lake. It's about boundaries, knowing where yours begin and where someone else's ends. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced your own Meredith Thorne? Someone who mistook authority for ownership? Share your story in the comments below. Was I right to use the financial leverage? Or should I have just stayed out of it? Let me know. And hit that subscribe button if you want to see the next time I have to remind a self-proclaimed queen exactly who built the castle.